It doesn't scream, it doesn't rush. It simply begins with a silence so thick, so heavy, that it feels like the breath before a scream that never comes. Let's Scare Jessica to Death is not your typical horror film. It doesn't chase you with monsters. It doesn't startle you with blood. Instead, it lingers, in the quiet, in the spaces between thoughts, in the parts of the mind we pretend aren't there. Released in 1971, it was a film that slipped into cinemas under a cloud of uncertainty. There were no stars, no guarantees, and no clear marketing angle. Just a strange, whispering narrative about a woman, Jessica, recovering from an unnamed mental break, moving with her husband to an isolated house by the lake. But the peace she seeks never quite arrives. Instead, something else begins to rise. Not from the lake, not from the house, but from within her. Jessica is the lens, and through her, reality begins to warp. Time folds, conversations don't finish, glances linger too long, and nothing, not even her own thoughts, can be trusted. Is Emily a real woman or a parasite wearing human skin? Is Jessica seeing ghosts or remembering something buried? The film doesn't offer answers. It offers questions and leaves you stranded inside them. Critics didn't know what to do with it. Audiences felt disoriented, not terrified. And for decades, it lived in the margins. But quietly, slowly, it began to grow, passed from one horror fan to another, like a secret too powerful to say out loud. This isn't just a horror film, it's a mirror held up not to the supernatural, but to the parts of ourselves we'd rather keep locked away. These are 20 strange, uncomfortable, and forgotten truths you didn't know about Let's Scare Jessica to Death. Fact 1. Jessica was a late addition to a completely different story. The film you know as Let's Scare Jessica to Death was never meant to exist in its final form, at least not the way it does now. In its earliest version, the script carried a different title. It Drinks Hippie Blood, a brash, low-budget horror concept tailored for drive, in audiences looking for thrills, not subtlety. There was no Jessica, no lake house, no whispers of madness, just a loose plot about counterculture youth, ritualistic danger, and a female predator in white who drains blood under the cover of the woods. Then John Hancock stepped in, a theater-trained director with a deep fascination for character-driven tension. Hancock rejected the original tone entirely. He rewrote the script, stripped away the campy structure, and reimagined the story from the inside out, introducing a new protagonist, Jessica, a woman on the edge of recovery. A woman whose mind was no longer a safe place to live in. Jessica wasn't just added, she became the film. Hancock shifted the genre from supernatural exploitation to psychological horror wrapped in ambiguity. The monsters became symbolic. The fear turned inward. Blood still existed, but it no longer mattered if it was real or imagined. What emerged was not a narrative about a vampire stalking flower children. It was a portrait of someone trying to heal while the world quietly conspires to keep her broken. So the real question is, was the film transformed to suit Jessica, or did Jessica force the story to conform to her? Fact 2. The whispers weren't added later. She heard them live. Jessica's descent into paranoia feels disturbingly real, and that's because it wasn't entirely acted. During filming, the production team embedded tiny speakers near the set and played audio cues, soft, repetitive whispers designed to subtly influence Zora Lampert's performance in real time. These weren't post-production tricks. Lampert was hearing voices no one else on set could hear. Phrases like, "They're watching," or "You don't belong here," would cut through the air while she performed scenes of solitude and anxiety. Lampert, trained in method acting, didn't just pretend to be shaken, she was actively living within Jessica's fractured experience. She journaled in character, she avoided social interaction, and she often didn't know which lines would appear, or when. This created a performance that was responsive, not rehearsed. One whisper line, "You are dead, you just don't know it yet," was so disturbing that it was removed entirely from the final cut. But by then, its psychological residue had already been imprinted onto Lampert's acting. This tactic blurred the line between script and psyche. Jessica's fear wasn't merely cinematic, it was environmental. So, how do you measure what's real, when even the sounds in your ears have been designed to betray you? Fact 3. The town didn't feel empty. It was told to vanish. There's an eerie stillness in the town where Jessica tries to rebuild her life. It feels unnatural, like a painting of reality rather than the thing itself. Streets stretch out with no people, homes look lived in but unlived, and silence follows Jessica like a second shadow. This wasn't an accident or a convenient byproduct of shooting on a small budget. The crew filmed in Chester, Connecticut, a sleepy New England village. Hancock made a deliberate request. Residents were asked not to appear during shooting. Shops were closed. Even cars were removed from streets. Locals agreed to stay indoors, creating the illusion of a town that had either forgotten how to move or was watching her from behind closed curtains. In one funeral scene, the extras weren't actors. They were actual townspeople, directed to stand motionless, avoid eye contact, and never speak. The result? An unsettling tableau where even human beings felt like ghosts present in form, but absent in soul. This crafted absence wasn't just logistical, it was thematic. Jessica's isolation wasn't metaphor, it was geography, orchestrated against her. But if the town refuses to acknowledge you, is your loneliness still a symptom, or has it become the setting? Fact 4. A blood scene. So disturbing the crew couldn't keep filming? It's a quiet scene. Jessica slices her hand, and the blood trickles into the lake. There's no music, no dialogue, just the sound of water and the deep red spreading beneath the surface. To viewers, it lasts a few seconds. On set, it was something else entirely. In the original version, the scene lingered far longer. Jessica, barely blinking, watches the wound as her blood dilutes slowly in the lake. There's no scream, just her dissociative calm, and that's what made it so unnerving. The crew watched the playback in silence. According to the cinematographer, one camera assistant left the set and refused to return. Another said the scene felt like watching someone give up. Director Hancock later cut the sequence down significantly. He removed some of the more graphic close-ups and re-edited the rhythm. But the original take, described by some as clinical despair on film, still exists, unseen, in the archives. And perhaps that's for the best, because once a scene stops being horror and starts resembling real psychological collapse, what exactly are we watching? Fact 5. Marie Claire Costello didn't break character because she never built one. Emily is not just strange, she's off. Her presence is cold but alluring. Her gaze holds too long. Her smile never quite reaches her eyes. And that's not acting. That's isolation weaponized. Actress Marie Claire Costello agreed with Hancock that Emily should feel disconnected not just from Jessica, but from the cast itself. From day one, she avoided all casual interaction. She ate alone, rehearsed alone, and never spoke to Zora Lampert unless the cameras were rolling. Cast members said Costello often stood quietly in doorways, watching, without announcing herself. When asked a question off camera, she would simply nod or walk away. The goal was to make Emily unknowable, to build a distance that couldn't be closed, and it worked. Lampert later confessed that during certain scenes, she wasn't acting afraid. She was afraid because she couldn't tell what was being performed and what wasn't. And maybe that's the point. When someone removes themselves so completely from the group, is what they bring to the screen even a character anymore? Fact 6. The Forgotten Cemetery wasn't on any map or any script. It's one of the film's most haunting locations, a moss-covered graveyard tucked deep within the woods, crooked stones tilting like teeth, the past quietly rotting in the soil, but it was never part of the plan. While scouting lakeside locations, a crew member stumbled upon a hidden cemetery, no signs, no fences, no paths leading in or out, just rows of ancient graves slowly dissolving into the trees. When Hancock saw it, he changed the schedule immediately. They would shoot there. No permits, no prep, just a camera, and the feeling that something was waiting. What unnerved the crew wasn't just the location, but the fact that several names on the tombstones matched characters in the film. These weren't names added in post Jessica, Emily, Duncan. They were already written in stone. Some believed it was pure coincidence. Others weren't so sure. After that day, 2 crew members refused to return to the site. One suffered a panic attack. The other never gave an explanation. The footage made it into the final cut. Brief, unexplained, but unforgettable. So what do you call it when fiction walks into a forgotten graveyard and finds its story already buried there? Fact 7. Jessica's soundtrack was reversed, distorted, and played only for her. The soundtrack in Let's Scare Jessica to Death doesn't just set the tone, it reflects Jessica's fractured state of mind. And the way it was designed is as disorienting as the film itself. Composer Orville Stober didn't write traditional score pieces. Instead, he recorded simple guitar and piano tracks, then played them backward, slowed them down, and layered them imperfectly. The result was a dreamlike sound, recognizable but distorted. These tracks weren't used universally, they were played specifically in Jessica's scenes only, giving her subjective reality a warped texture. But there's more. Some of those sounds were played live on set, through low-volume speakers only Lampert could hear. Soft whispers, reversed chords, random hums. Her unsettled expressions were genuine reactions to this private soundscape. In one case, a reversed vocal track, just a breathy phrase slowed into static, was so disturbing in post-production that it was buried almost inaudibly. But it's there, listening, waiting. Jessica wasn't just losing control of her mind. The very sound of her world was betraying her. When even the silence carries a rhythm you don't understand, how do you know what's imagined and what's been planted in your ears? Fact 8. The ending wasn't planned. It was pure survival. The final scene is one of the most quietly haunting moments in horror. Jessica, alone in a boat, whispering, "I'm still alive." It's minimalist, mysterious, and completely improvised. Originally, the film was supposed to end differently. Jessica would flee into the woods, screaming. The lake wouldn't be the last thing we saw, but as production wound down, time and money disappeared. Weather was closing in. Hancock had to improvise. With only a few hours left of natural light, he put Lampert on a boat and asked her to drift. He didn't give her lines, just told her to think like Jessica would if she was completely alone, maybe even dead. What came out was that final whisper. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't scripted, it wasn't even sure if it would be usable, but when they reviewed the footage, they knew nothing else would work. That one line redefined the entire story. Was it hope? Was it denial? Or was it the last thought of someone who never truly escaped the mirror of her mind? Fact 9. Jessica's breakdown was medically informed. Jessica's unraveling isn't theatrical. It's too subtle, too textured, too specific. That's because her behavior was shaped by clinical expertise. Before filming began, Hancock enlisted a real psychiatrist to consult on the script. The expert provided notes on dissociative psychosis, focusing on behavior patterns, repeating thoughts, sudden shifts in tone, physical withdrawal, and hyper-awareness of environmental cues. These details were passed directly to Zora Lampert. Lampert built her portrayal around those traits. She incorporated nervous habits, tapping fingers, unfocused blinking, incomplete sentences, and approached every scene not as performance, but as symptom. Even Jessica's voiceovers were shaped by psychiatric writing. They mimic the tone of real mental health journals. Fractured logic, poetic phrasing, fear masked by rationalization. After viewing the finished film, the psychiatrist concluded, Jessica isn't mad. She's being forced to question reality by a world that refuses to confirm or deny what she's seeing. In other words, she's not the unreliable one. Maybe the real horror is how easily we dismiss someone's truth just because it doesn't match the version we're most comfortable believing. Fact 10. A film released in silence without warning or explanation. When Let's Scare Jessica to Death arrived in theaters, it did so like a ghost. No trailer blitz, no interview circuit, no marketing push to announce its arrival. It simply appeared. Paramount had no idea how to promote the film. It didn't fit into any recognizable genre box. It wasn't gory enough for horror fans of the time, nor cleanly psychological for the art house crowd. To some, it looked like a vampire movie. To others, a quiet drama about mental health. It confused focus groups and frustrated the studio, so they did the easiest thing. They buried it. In some markets, it was advertised alongside unrelated imagery. Other theaters mislabeled it or paired it with mismatched double features. The title alone, while memorable, gave no clue what the film actually was. But that absence of hype may have been the perfect camouflage. Audiences wandered in unprepared. Some walked out, others were disturbed in ways they couldn't explain. The movie didn't scream, it haunted, and in the years that followed, it began to travel by word of mouth, gaining followers the way secrets spread. Maybe the silence wasn't failure, it was design. And maybe the best horror doesn't knock before it enters. Fact 11. Jessica's clothes were lifted from real-life trauma. Jessica's wardrobe in the film isn't theatrical, it's not stylish, and it's not symbolic in any overt way, but it's deliberately chosen and eerily grounded in reality. Costume designer Nancy Potts once observed a young woman in a psychiatric hospital who wore the same oversized white dress every day. It wasn't because of comfort, it wasn't identity, it was routine, a uniform of stillness. She also clutched a cloth scrap in her hand at all times, her anchor. Potts took that imagery and built Jessica's look around it. Flowing cotton dresses, no color, no tightness, no sharp edges. Clothes that seemed to hover around the body rather than hold it. A person disappearing beneath fabric. Lampert added to this effect by requesting minimal makeup, natural lighting, and unstyled hair. The result? A woman who didn't look fragile because she was playing the part she looked fragile, because everything around her refused to acknowledge her solidity. When someone dresses like they're not really here, how long before we start believing it? Fact 12. The house by the lake already had a ghost. The house in Let's Scare Jessica to Death wasn't a studio set. It wasn't built for production. It existed long before the cameras arrived, and it came with a story. Locals warned the crew about a woman who once lived there. She had vanished decades earlier, her last known location near the lake behind the house. Some say she drowned. Others say she walked into the trees and never returned. No body was recovered, no funeral held. The crew didn't pay it much attention until the equipment began acting strangely. Audio recordings were corrupted. Lights flickered without cause. One crew member fainted by the water and claimed he felt dragged forward by something he couldn't see. Rather than avoid the myth, Hancock embraced it. He rewrote several scenes to lean into the eeriness of the setting, letting the legend become part of the emotional atmosphere. He even encouraged cast members to spend time alone in the house before shooting. Whether the ghost was real or not didn't matter. By the time filming wrapped, it had already left its mark. Jessica may not have been the first to feel lost inside that house. And if the lake keeps secrets, maybe it keeps them underwater. Fact 13. Dialogue that sounds translated because it was meant to. There's something off about the way people talk in Let's Scare Jessica to Death. Not unnatural, not stilted, but strangely detached, as if everyone were speaking with just a slight delay, or reaching for words that don't quite land. That wasn't the result of weak writing. It was a deliberate stylistic choice. Director John Hancock wanted the dialogue to feel emotionally intuitive but linguistically broken. To achieve this, he asked writer Lee Kalchheim to rewrite some scenes in French, then retranslate them back into English without using idiomatic corrections. The outcome? Lines that almost made sense, just distant enough to feel alien. This method blurred meaning just slightly. Questions went unanswered. Replies drifted off course. Conversations looped without closure. No one interrupted. Everyone paused just a bit too long. The result was uncanny. A world that looked real, but where language itself had started to decay. You don't realize it's happening, but your brain does. The discomfort settles in beneath awareness. So when people speak like shadows of themselves, is it the world that's unreal, or are you just slipping out of sync with it? Fact 14. Emily's voice was manipulated into something inhuman. One of the film's most unsettling moments comes not from visuals, but from sound. Emily, the enigmatic redhead, stands near the water and sings a soft lullaby. Her voice is gentle, but something's wrong. That's because what you hear isn't what she sang. Mara Claire Costello recorded the piece live, singing it softly during filming. But in post-production, the audio was slowed down by 40%, pitched slightly lower, and layered over itself with an echo offset. It created an effect that mimics human warmth, but stretches it beyond recognition. The lyrics are intentionally vague. What matters is how the voice sounds. Too slow, too calm, too uncaring. It doesn't comfort, it consumes. The film never tells you what the song means, and that silence forces your brain to assign meaning where none is offered. That's where the dread grows, in the absence of clarity. So what happens when a song no longer feels like it's being sung to you, but around you? Fact 15. The blood in the bathtub wasn't special effects. Blood appears in a white bathtub. No wound is shown, no one is present, just red in the water and Jessica watching it in silence. It's a simple scene, but its realism makes it almost unbearable. What many viewers don't know is that the blood was not fake. Initially, the crew used commercial stage blood, but under the lighting and water, it separated into unnatural layers. It looked artificial, unconvincing, so they made a drastic decision. Use real animal blood, mixed with glycerin, to maintain consistency. Zora Lampert wasn't informed. Her reaction, the visible revulsion, the brief moment of dry heaving, her refusal to step fully into the tub was genuine. She had no idea what she was reacting to. She just felt that something was wrong. The scene was never explained in the script. No context, no payoff. It just happens and lingers. Because sometimes, fear doesn't need logic. It just needs to stain something pure. So when the water turns red, do you look for the source or do you wonder what you brought with you? Fact 16. Vampire was the one word no one could say. Throughout the entire production of Let's Scare Jessica to Death, cast and crew followed an unusual directive. They were forbidden from using the word vampire. It wasn't a legal issue or a censorship concern, it was a creative mandate from director John Hancock himself. His reasoning? The moment you call something by name, you give it shape, you define it. And he didn't want Emily, the enigmatic redhead who invades Jessica's life, to be defined. Emily shows many vampire-like traits. She's pale, seductive, seems ageless, and there's even a moment where her teeth flash unnaturally. But these hints are never confirmed. Her danger isn't clarified. It's felt, not explained. Actors were asked not to conceptualize her as supernatural. They were told to treat her like a stranger who might be dangerous or who might be imagined. Even during marketing, the studio avoided vampire tropes. It was as if the film itself feared what it was playing with. So if no one in the film says the word, and no one behind the scenes would speak it either, was she a vampire? Or was she a mirror, reflecting Jessica's fear of being replaced? Fact 17. Jessica's voiceovers came from her private writings. Jessica's whispering inner monologue is one of the film's signature features. It grounds us in her perspective, makes us question what we see, and draws us into the slow disintegration of her thoughts. But those lines weren't originally part of the screenplay. Actress Zora Lampert was a method performer. While preparing for the role, she kept a handwritten journal written entirely in character. It included fears, phrases, inner debates, and scattered fragments that mirrored Jessica's unraveling. After principal photography ended, Hancock and his editor felt that something was missing. The film lacked a direct emotional thread, so they went back to Lampert's notes and used them to build the voiceover script. Lines like, "Maybe I'm better," or "Maybe I just stopped trying to explain it," came straight from the margins of her notebook. What began as an actor's internal exercise became the emotional architecture of the film. So when you hear Jessica's voice, you're not listening to narration. You're overhearing a mind trying to keep itself from slipping. Fact 18. Critics hated it until they couldn't ignore it anymore. Upon release, Let's Scare Jessica to Death wasn't embraced. It was misunderstood. Reviews ranged from lukewarm to dismissive. Major outlets called it meandering, pointless, thin. Its quiet pacing and refusal to explain itself were seen not as strengths, but as flaws. But time has a strange effect on certain films. Over the years, horror scholars began revisiting the movie. Academic journals analyzed its symbolism. Directors like Ty West and Ari Aster cited it as an early influence. Fans championed it online. And slowly, critics who once ignored or mocked it began to reassess. Some rewrote their original reviews. Others admitted that they didn't get it. One notable critic called it a film ahead of its emotional time where horror isn't about violence, but about the slow leak of certainty. Today, it's listed on numerous best-of horror lists, not for what it shows, but for what it refuses to say out loud. Maybe Jessica was never confused. Maybe we were just too quick to label what we didn't understand. Fact 19. The lake didn't just reflect Jessica. It breathed with her. The lake that surrounds the house in Let's Scare Jessica to Death plays more than a scenic role. It becomes a kind of entity, passive, still, but somehow sentient. And that was no accident. Sound designer Morten Tubor crafted a subliminal audio layer using his own breath. He recorded long, drawn-out inhales and exhales, then digitally processed them to mimic the slow rhythm of water movement. These breath loops were buried just beneath the natural ambience, low enough to go unnoticed consciously, but unsettling on a subconscious level. Scenes where Jessica sits by the lake feel strangely claustrophobic. The surface doesn't shimmer, it exhales. And without realizing it, the viewer starts to sync with that rhythm. It feels like the lake is alive, not violently so, but watchfully. There's no splash, no monster, just a quiet presence, observing. It's easy to miss, but once you've noticed it, you can't forget it. When even the setting begins to breathe with the character, is it the world that's haunting her? Or has her perception become so altered that it can no longer filter what's real? Fact 20. Jessica was based on a real case, and that woman saw the film alone. Jessica's character wasn't pure invention. She was inspired by a psychiatric case study. Before filming, Hancock shared with Lampert a detailed file about a woman in her late 20s who had experienced dissociative psychosis after a traumatic personal loss. The woman exhibited symptoms eerily similar to Jessica's: auditory hallucinations, mistrust of loved ones, obsession with water, and vivid dreams she couldn't separate from waking life. Lampert used the file as a foundation. She mimicked not just the woman's behaviors, but her rhythms, the way she spoke in half sentences, the stillness when she didn't understand what was being said, the way she folded her hands as if protecting herself. After the film was complete, Hancock invited that woman to a private screening. No press, no notes, just her, alone in a dark theater. She didn't say much afterward, just one sentence. "She didn't look like me, but I knew what she was feeling every second of it." So was Jessica a performance? Or was she a reflection of something most of us would rather not recognize? Bonus fact: the trilogy that never happened. Jessica's story wasn't meant to stand alone. Director John Hancock had envisioned a three-part thematic trilogy, each focusing on a female protagonist spiraling through a world where the line between reality and delusion eroded by degrees. Let's Scare Jessica to Death was to be the first. The second installment, tentatively titled Watching Eleanor Drown, would have followed a woman confined to a seaside psychiatric hospital where no one seems to age and the ocean begins to call her by name. The third, Lydia's House, focused on a mute woman whose nightmares start to rewrite the lives of those around her. She dreams in fragments, and the fragments become real. Both projects were drafted. Neither was filmed. The failure of Jessica at the box office meant the trilogy was shelved indefinitely. But elements of those stories, women disconnected from language, haunted by sound, stalked by stillness, live inside Jessica like echoes from an unwritten future. So the question isn't what comes next. It's, what did we lose when we stopped listening? Let's Scare Jessica to Death doesn't hand you answers. It leaves you drifting uncertain, unsettled, still listening for the next whisper. But maybe that's the point. So now we turn it over to you. Was Jessica truly losing her grip, or seeing something the rest of us refuse to? Drop a comment with the fact that disturbed you most, and tell us what forgotten film we should dig into next. And if you made it this far, subscribe before the lake goes quiet again.